So we left off in the last video in this main.cpp file, and I also said in the last video that if you want your C++ program to run, you need something called a main function. And so that'll be the focus of this video. What is a main function? What does it do for you? How do we make one for ourselves? What are all the parts for it, etc., etc.? So let's talk about what a main function is, I guess. I guess first and foremost, you might describe it as a place in the program where the main logic of your code resides. And so, say your program is going to be written to write a peanut butter and jelly sandwich into existence. Well, you might write code to get some bread and get some peanut butter, a knife, and some jelly, and then spread the jelly on one piece of bread and spread the peanut butter on another. And so that's what I mean by main logic, just this sort of set of instructions that tells your program what to do at its core. Now, you can also think of a function, because there's other types of functions other than the main function. You can also think of your function as a sort of machine. It takes some sort of inputs, and maybe the inputs for the peanut butter and jelly machine might be the peanut butter, the bread, the jelly, and then it does some sort of work, like make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and then it produces an output, say like producing a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, And so let's type out some syntax and sort of get a more clearer understanding of what I'm talking about here. So don't worry about what the syntax is word for word yet. I'll back up and I'll explain each part to you. But if you're going to create a main function, you need to type out the keyword int, put a space there, type out the keyword main, all lowercase, by the way, just like I'm typing these things out. And then you put an open and closed set of parentheses. Now you drop down a line and you put an open curly bracket there. Now code blocks will automatically generate a closed curly bracket and tab in once for you. If your particular IDE, if you chose to go with a different one, doesn't do this, then make sure you put your closed curly bracket and tab in one. Then you're going to type out the keyword return, put a space, put a 0, and then put a semicolon. Now, congratulations, you've just created your first main function. If you click up top here where it says build and run on this icon that looks like a cog and a play button, you should get this black terminal screen that pops up. If you get this, then you have done everything correctly. If not, well, make your code look like mine. Now, all of this being said, this has a bunch of parts to it, and so let's explain this piece by piece. Here is the name of our function. It happens to be called main. It has to be typed in just like this, as I said earlier. It can't be capitalized, it can't be all caps, it can't be misspelled, it can't be anything other than spelled correctly, all lowercase main. And so that's the name of the function. As I said earlier too, you can have different types of functions. So maybe let's speak abstractly here so that we can get a more clear understanding of what this does and what all the parts are. And so let's say that, if this is the name of the function, this is main, well, let's say our function is something else. Once again, I've said that, these functions sort of operate like little virtual machines. And so say that this is a candy bar machine, and that is the name of this machine is candy bar machine. Then within these parentheses here might be the inputs for the candy bar machine. And we'll say that the inputs for a candy bar machine are the raw ingredients that it takes to produce a candy bar. So this might be chocolate, I don't know, peanuts, it might be some nougat, it might be some caramel, etc., etc. And so let's say that these are the raw ingredients for our candy bar. Now inside these curly braces here is where you would do the work to make the candy bars. And so I'm just going to type that out. We'll say make the candy bars. And notice that each line of code in C++ generally ends with a semicolon. There are exceptions to this. This top line here, for instance, is called a function header. Function headers do not get a semicolon. In cases like this where you have brackets, you don't put a semicolon after the bracket. But if this had thousands of lines of code in there, you would see that 990 of the lines just about would have a semicolon at the end of it. So that is a general rule, and I'll show you the exceptions as they pop up. But in here, you can have a bunch of lines of code. I simplified it to one, make the candy bars, but it might be, I don't know, melt the chocolate, lay it in a flat layer, sprinkle some peanuts in, glob some nougat in there, whatever the steps are. It can be lines and lines long. I just put one here just to simplify the process and make the candy bars. Then here at the end, you have this return statement that also gets a semicolon. Now, what is this all about? Here is the finished product as it leaves the machine. And so in this case, we might be imagining a finished candy bar leaving the machine. So we're going to return a candy bar. This is, any user that runs this machine, this is what we're handing them. This is what comes out of the machine, a candy bar, for instance, in this case. Now, this statement right here, this return candy bar, goes hand in hand with this little bit of code right there. Now here, we're returning a candy bar. This line up here, basically, it's asking us, what do we expect as an output from the machine, loosely speaking. And so loosely speaking, well, we can say that we expect a piece of candy to come out of the machine. And so that's it. That's what all the syntax is for in your main function. So let's convert this back to a main function and maybe clear up some stuff along the way as well. And so this is the name of the main function, right? Candy bar machine goes back to main. So the inputs for the main function, for now, we're going to leave them empty. Your machine doesn't necessarily require inputs. Sometimes it just does stuff and doesn't require anything to do it. Main functions are like that. Sometimes you can give them inputs, sometimes they don't need them. For the time being, we're going to leave that empty. Now, you can also choose to put the word void in there. This works just as well. And basically here, you're just explicitly saying that I'm not going to give you any inputs. But it's just as understood that if you leave it empty, well, that's the same thing as void. Now, I'm going to get rid of this line here because it's not valid C++ syntax, and I want this thing to run again. So I'm going to eliminate that line. Now, once again, this statement, this return statement, returns specifically a candy bar. And up top here, this sort of goes hand in hand. What kind of return are we expecting here? Maybe a piece of candy. Well, in the original main function, we returned a 0. And then up top here, we had int. Now, int is short for integer. Now, if you haven't been to math in a while, well, an integer is just a whole number. It can be, I don't know, negative. It can be, so negative 1,000. It can be 0 itself. It can be a positive number like 233, just as long as it's a whole number. Nothing fractional, nothing like 23.24, and nothing that's explicitly a fraction like 4/7 or something. Just as long as it's a whole number, it can be negative, it can be 0, or it can be positive, but a whole number. And so loosely speaking, we're expecting an integer to return from our main function here. And we're going to return a 0. As a matter of fact, when you run this, you see that process returned 0. And that is referring to this line right here, this return 0 at the end. Now, it's a convention in C++ coding that if everything went well in your program and all the lines executed and you didn't get hung up by any bugs and your program didn't crash, then you're going to return a 0, and that 0 means that everything went fine. So if you run your program and you see this process returned 0 there, that is great. Now, if you have some sort of error, you can create error codes, essentially. And this is just made by you. And so if you have like a particular type of error, say, you can return a -1. And then when you run this, you see process returned -1 this time. And so this lets you know not only did you have an error, but it was a particular type of error, whichever error -1 corresponds to. And you can have different numbers corresponding to different errors. -2 might correspond to yet a different type of error. And we see that process returned -2 here. And so the sky's the limit. You can put whatever number for whatever error, but general convention is that if you return a 0, then everything went smoothly. So that's the main in a nutshell, and we'll explore how we add actual legitimate C++ code inside of the main next. See you in the next video.